What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Zero Lab. Today is a very exciting day because the new Pokemon TCG Pocket set, Triumphant Light, has released today. This set is really fun, and it is comparable to our Mythical Island set that we got after Genetic Apex. So this is sort of more like a mini set, so we can't expect massive changes in the meta from this, but we should expect at least a couple new interesting decks and mechanics from this set. So today we're going to go over the cards in this set, do a quick set review, and talk about any new interesting strategies that are coming out of it. Obviously, the Arceus Star, Arceus EX is probably one of the best cards in the set. And that will probably be the focus of any new decks coming out of Triumphant Light. So we're going to go over the full set list, do a quick review of all of the cards, take a look at which ones we think are going to be competitively viable, and we will go from there. So I'm actually going to scroll to the bottom here because we want to start with the trainers in the set because the trainers affect some of the Pokemon in the set. So we want to have context around what the trainers do before we take a look at the Pokemon. Obviously, we've got some really cool arts in here as well. But we're going to start with the new trainers, and we just have 4 new trainers, and they're all supporters. No new items in the set, no new tools, and no stadiums or anything like that yet in the game. Starting off, we have Irida, and this card seems very strong. Heal 40 damage from each of your Pokemon that has any water energy attached. 40 damage from each of your Pokemon that has any water energy attached. So Palkia obviously was already a very strong deck, powering up Palkia with Manaphy and Misty and those sorts of things. But now we have some healing for that deck as well, which seems really good. But this isn't limited to healing water Pokemon. It just heals Pokemon with water energies attached. So your colorless Pokemon, any Pokemon that you have water energy attached to, you can heal 40 damage from them with Irida, which seems really strong. One of the first things that came to mind for me was that there are grass-type Pokemon out there that we can heal with Erica, like a tank and heal strategy with Ericas and potions on grass-type Pokemon. And maybe you can play like a grass-type deck that plays grass energies and water energies, and now you just like have basically 4 Erica in your deck instead of only 2. So this card seems pretty strong, and I think we'll see a lot of competitive play. The next supporter we have is Celestic Town Elder, and this is really interesting. It says put 1 random basic Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand. I think the thing that will limit this from being played mostly is the fact that it says put 1 random basic Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand. Now, obviously, it's not random. If you only have 1 basic Pokemon in your discard pile, you're just going to get that basic Pokemon back. But this is the first recovery we've seen from our discard pile. This is the first recovery card that we've seen. So this could be really interesting. If you play a deck that's got like low HP basics that need to evolve up, maybe you throw in 1 Celestic Town Elder. Let's say you're playing Executor EX, and you start your Execute, and it gets knocked out like turn 1. Maybe, you're only going to have 1 Executor EX then for the rest of the game. So maybe playing something like a Celestic Town Elder to get back that lower HP basic Pokemon that's going to get knocked out early could be interesting. I don't see this seeing a ton of play right now, but I think it is a really interesting card to have available in the card pool. So cool to see our first discard pile recovery card come into the format. Then we have Berry. Berry says during this turn, attacks used by your Snorlax, Heracross, and Staraptor cost 2 less colorless energies. So we'll have to keep that in mind as we go through the set list, looking at those Pokemon. Berry applies to those. So that is a pretty cool supporter, depending on if those Pokemon have good attacks. And then finally, we have Adaman. During your opponent's next turn, all of your metal Pokemon take 20 less damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. So some damage mitigation for metal types, which is interesting for things like Melmetal, Dialga EX, and those sorts of things. So I could see this seeing some play in metal decks, although metal decks aren't the strongest decks out there right now. So those are our 4 new trainers. And from there, we're just going to scroll back up to the top and go through each of these Pokemon. We might go through some of them more quickly than others, might not click into all of them just because they don't quite have much relevance. But we'll start here with the Heracross. Obviously, Heracross can be powered up by Berry. Berry says your Heracross, Staraptor, and Snorlax have 2 colorless less energy in their attack cost when you play berry, which means that this Heracross is attacking for 1 grass energy when we play the berry supporter. So Heracross has 100 HP, and for a grass and 2 colorless, it has the single horn throw attack where you do 50, and then you flip 2 coins. If both of them are heads, this attack does 70 more damage. So it can be powered up quickly by berry. However, I don't think this card's very good. Really, you're only doing 50 damage, and you have to get a pretty crazy combo where you like have Heracross and play Berry as your supporter for turn just to be able to attack with Heracross for one grass energy, and you're only doing 50. And realistically, you're only doing 50. I mean, you have a 25% chance of doing 120, which is kind of good. I think this would have been fine to just say flip 1 coin if heads, you do 70 more damage. Because you already have to pair it with the berry supporter. I don't see this being very good, to be honest with you. We have the Burmy and the Motham. Motham has free retreat, so that's interesting. And for 2 colorless energy, it has gust for 50. But this is just a pretty weak stage 1. I don't see this seeing any play really at all. Then we have the Vespiquen. Vespiquen has 100 HP for 3 grass energy. It has the Reckless Charge attack. It does 120, and then this Pokemon does 30 damage to itself. 120 damage on a 1-prize Pokemon is quite good. However, getting 3 grass energy on here might be kind of tough. There are some new ways in the set to accelerate grass energy, but I think overall this won't be quite strong enough. And we have the Cherrim line. There are 2 different Cherrims. We have the covered form and then the sun form. I forget what this form is called. Anyway, the first one has the Worry Seed attack. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. So Worry Seed, 1 grass for 40, and Confusion. I think that would be good on a basic, but I don't think it's quite good enough on a stage 1. And then Cherrim, the other Cherrim, has 8 HP, has Leech Seed for 2 grass energy. You heal 20 damage from this Pokemon, and you do 60. So that one's kind of interesting, but you don't really have enough HP on this Cherrim to really be like a tank and heal sort of thing. So I'm not quite sure that's good enough either. And we have all of these Pokemon in this set that have abilities, like the Link abilities, that are powered up by having an Arceus in play. And Carnivine is the first one of those. It has the Power Link ability. If you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, attacks used by this Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Then it has Vine Whip for 1 grass energy. You do 20 damage. So if you have an Arceus in play, 1 grass for 50 on a 80 HP basic, that's pretty good. That's like better than Kangaskhan. I think that's better than Kangaskhan. I think that's better than Farfetch'd. Those are like early game attackers that a lot of decks sometimes try to use. So I do think the Carnivine is really good. Obviously, you have to have the Arceus in play, though, to get that extra damage. But yeah, I think that is a reasonable attacker that we could see some play in like some sort of Arceus grass deck. And then we have a new Leafeon. This is Leafeon EX. This has the ability Forest Breath. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may take a grass energy from your energy zone and attach it to one of your grass Pokemon. So, new grass type energy acceleration seems very cool. Has 1 retreat cost, so we could use 2 Leafeon EXs in a turn. If we have Leafeon EX in the active position, we use Forest Breath, and then we retreat out into our other Leafeon EX and use Forest Breath on that Leafeon EX. So this is pretty good at grass energy acceleration. Obviously, it's on a stage 1, but I do think there are going to be a good amount of decks that utilize this Leafeon EX to power up things. This could be an interesting new way to power up Celebi EX. Obviously, we were using Superior as a way to power up Celebi, but these Leafeons could be sort of a new way to do that, and that would be really interesting. I plan to make a deck around that. I don't expect it to be as strong as the Superior, but I could be wrong. So you gotta test these things out, right? But I think this is really cool to have more grass type energy acceleration in the game. The other thing that you could obviously pair this with is like Venusaur EX. That makes a lot of sense as well. Moving on to our fire types, we have Houndoom. 100 HP, has the corner attack for a fire and colorless, does 60 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. Cool artwork here on the Houndoom, but I don't think this is overall a very good card. Now we have Heatran with another Link ability. This one obviously has to do with having Arceus EX in play. Has the Speed Link ability. If you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, this Pokemon has no retreat cost. That's very cool. No retreat is a very powerful thing to have in the game. And then for 2 fire, it has the Raging Mad Strike attack, 40 damage. If this Pokemon has damage on it, this attack does 40 more damage. So doing 80 for 2 fire on a basic, that seems pretty good. He's got 110, so he can kind of tank some hits. You could throw a Rocky Helmet or a Cape on the Heatran, give it a little bit more HP, or throw the Rocky Helmet on him to do a little bit more damage back to your opponents. That seems really interesting. So I do think this Heatran is all right, and we'll see how much play that this sees. We have the Azumarill line here, nothing too special. Stage 1 for 2 energy does 60. Excuse me. Yeah, I don't think this is going to see any play. Then we have the Whiscash. For 4 energy, it does 80. Flip a coin. If heads, this attack does 60 more damage. If tails, this Pokemon also does 20 damage to itself. Kind of a funny thing. You can do 140 with... excuse me. 140 with a Stage 1 Pokemon. But I don't think this is very good. More of a meme than anything. We then have the Frostlass. This is kind of interesting, but again, might not be quite good enough. It has the Blizzard attack, so similar to Articuno EX, but it does 40 to the active and then 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Some spread damage is pretty good, but this being a Stage 1 and needing 2 energy to attack, I don't quite see this seeing much play. You'd rather probably just attack with an Articuno EX, which is a basic and you can power it up with Misty. Then we have the Abomasnow. This has another Arceus ability. If you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, attacks used by this Pokemon cost 1 less colorless energy. So basically, if you have Arceus in play, Abomasnow attacks for 2 water energy, has the Mega Punch attack for 80. That could be interesting as a one-prize attacker in some sort of like a water build of Arceus. Obviously, it's got 120 HP, so it's kind of chunky. We have the new Irida supporter, which can heal 40 damage from each of our Pokemon with water energies attached. We have Manaphy that can accelerate water energy, so we can accelerate water energy to the Arceus, to the Abomasnow with Manaphy, and then go in with either the Abomasnow or the Arceus, and then be healing a little bit with Iridas. So I do see this seeing some play. Again, I don't think it's going to be like a tier 1 archetype, but people will play water Arceus decks with this. This seems interesting at least. Then we have a new Glaceon EX. This has the Snowy Terrain ability during Pokemon checkups. So that's between both your turn and your opponent's turn. If this Pokemon is in the active spot, do 10 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. Then it has the Freezing Wind attack for 2 water and a colorless energy, does 90 damage. I actually think this card is really interesting. Because it does it between Pokemon checkup or during Pokemon checkup, it means that when you end your turn going to your opponent, you're going to do 10 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. And when your opponent ends their turn going back to you, you're also going to do another 10 damage. So you're basically doing another 20 damage between turns with this Snowy Terrain ability. Then you have the Freezing Wind to do extra damage as well. Obviously, you'd be attacking with the Glaceon. So I do think that this card is really, really interesting. Obviously, we can power it up with Manaphy, we can power it up with Misty, those sorts of things, and it's not weak to anything too relevant, weak to metal, as it is a ice type, but metal isn't super crazy in the game right now, so that's not a big deal. We have an Origin Form Palkia. This has 120 HP. For 3 water energy, has the Zone Smash attack. Flip a coin. If heads, this attack does 60 more damage. I don't think this card's going to see any play. And we have a new Phione. For 60, it has 60 HP, and then for 2 water energy, it has the Water Pulse attack. 40 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. Sleep is a really strong status condition in the game, and so that the fact that this doesn't flip a coin or anything to put your opponent to sleep says to me that this could be an interesting card. I don't see it seeing a ton of play, but I do think status conditions are pretty strong. This basically does what the Frostmoth from Genetic Apex did on a basic, so that's just strictly better than that Frostmoth. We have a new Raichu. This has the Link ability, Resilience Link. If you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. And then it has the Spark attack for 2 lightning. This attack also does 20 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. This seems like one of the worst, the less good Link abilities. I don't really see Raichu seeing any play. We have a Manectric, has the Flash attack for 1 lightning energy, does 40 damage. During your opponent's next turn, if the defending Pokemon tries to use an attack, Your opponent flips a coin if tails. The attack doesn't happen. That's actually a really interesting. That's a really interesting attack on the Manectric. Really disruptive to your opponents if they have to flip a coin, and they flip tails. They're not able to attack. That seems pretty cool. I think this could see some play in Lightning decks for sure. I don't see any reason not to throw this in a Pikachu EX deck, because it can just stall you for a turn, and I think that seems really strong. Then we have Clefable, has the Moonblast attack for a Psychic and 2 colorless, does 60 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, attacks used by the defending Pokemon do 30 less damage. Not very powerful. 3 energy for that attack is way too much. And then we have a new Gengar. Gengar has the Hypnoblast attack for 2 Psychic energy, does 70 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. That's just not enough damage to be doing on a stage 2. It takes forever to get these guys in play. If he only does this and does 40 damage as a basic, so yeah, I don't see this seeing any play. Then we have this new Unknown. This has an interesting ability. Once during your turn, you may choose either player and look at the top card of that player's deck. That's just an interesting ability. Pairs really well with the Mythical Slab from Mythical Island. You can just check your top deck, see if it is something that you want to put to the bottom of your deck with the Mythical Slab, or if it's a Psychic Pokemon. Yeah, that's just interesting to have access to. We have this Rotom with a Link ability. If you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, this Pokemon has no retreat cost. Then it has the Dash attack. It does 20 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. That's just not enough bench damage to be worth it, probably. But the fact that it is a colorless energy means it's splashable into any deck. So it's interesting, but probably not quite good enough. Obviously, the Hitmonlee in the fighting type decks that does this for 30 damage to one of your bench Pokemon, one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, can be very strong in those sorts of decks. So maybe we could see some play because it is a splashable attacker into any type of deck because of that colorless energy. We have a fighting type Sudowoodo, has the fighting headbutt attack for 1 fighting energy, does 20 damage and 30 more damage if your opponent's active Pokemon is a Pokemon EX. So that could be an interesting inclusion for fighting decks, although I think the Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee are probably still just better basic 1 energy attackers. We have a Donphan. Excuse me. We have a Donphan in here as well. It has the Rolling Spin attack for 3 fighting energy, does 60 damage. And during your next turn, this Pokemon's Rolling Spin attack does 60 more damage. So doing 60 and then 120 next turn is really, really cool. But there's not a great way to get 3 fighting energy on a fighting type Pokemon. We don't really have any fighting type acceleration in the game. And so I don't think Donphan is going to see much play. We have a new Tyranitar line. It has the Power Link ability. If you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, attacks used by this Pokemon do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. And that's really cool because this Tyranitar has Land Crush that'll do 160 damage if you have an Arceus EX in play. 160 damage is really, really strong. It's tough to get the energy that you need on this Tyranitar because you need 3 fighting energy and a colorless energy. Like we just mentioned with the Donphan, there's not a great way to accelerate fighting type energy, but it might be worth setting up this Tyranitar behind a Dredagon or a Kangaskhan or something a little tanky, because this is actually a very powerful attack if you can get it powered up. Yeah, I think that this seems like a card that could see some play, sort of how we saw the Golem see some play in prior formats. I think this card is actually pretty good. And with 160 HP, it's very difficult to one-shot this. You can throw a cape on it, make it 180 HP. I think this Tyranitar might actually be pretty good. Then we have Medicham. Kick Shot for 1 fighting energy. Does 80 damage. Flip a coin if tails. This attack does nothing. This isn't going to see any play. That's just not worth it on a stage 1. And then we have a new Gibble, Gabite, and Garchomp line. This time it is a Garchomp EX. I was really excited when I heard there was a Garchomp EX in this set, because the Garchomp from the last set that can be powered up with the Cynthia is really, really strong. So having an EX to throw into that deck as well seems really good, but I don't think the Garchomp EX is quite strong enough, unfortunately. The non-EX Garchomp is just so much better than this. This Garchomp EX has the linear attack. This attack does 50 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. So that's actually a pretty good attack, just to be able to target down anything that you've already done damage to. It has Dragon Claw for fighting colorless, does 100 damage. The thing to know, I don't think this works with Cynthia. Cynthia says your Togekiss and Garchomp do 50 more damage. When you play the Cynthia on your turn, it doesn't say your Garchomp EX. So, I don't believe that Cynthia applies to this card. So you can't do like 150 with Dragon Claw or like 100 with linear attack, or else maybe this card would be a lot better. I still think if you are playing a Garchomp deck, you do probably throw one of these into the deck. That linear attack is pretty good. And just like having that extra HP is also good. So I still think you throw one of these into like the Garchomp Cynthia deck, but you don't really make a whole deck around this. You'd rather be attacking with the non-EX Garchomp. Then we have what might be one of the best cards coming out of this set, this Crobat with the Cunning Link ability. It says once during your turn, if you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, you may do 30 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. That's crazy. That's a crazy amount of damage counters that you can throw around now with Crobat. It has the Darkness Fang attack for 1 Dark Energy, does 50. That's also like a pretty good attack, and it's got free retreat. This card is pretty nuts. And when we get to the Arceus, you'll see why the Arceus has an attack that basically can do 130 damage. But if you have a Crobat in play, you can bump that up to 160 or 190 if you have 2 Crobats in play. This card, I think, is probably one of the most hyped cards from the set. And I think this is going to see a lot of play. We have a Toxicroak here with the Toxic attack, 1 Dark Energy. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. Do 20 damage to this Pokemon instead of the usual amount for this special condition. I don't think this is really any good, but interesting to be doing more poison damage. Yeah, I just don't really see a use for this, though. We have a new Magneton, Magnemite, Magnezone line. This has the Resilience Link ability. If you have Arceus or Arceus EX in play, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks. Then it has the Power Beam attack for 80 for 2 metal and a colorless. The other Magnezone we have, the Lightning Magnezone, is just miles better than this. So this is never going to see any play. We have a Mawile with the Iron Beam Breaker attack for 1 colorless energy. If your opponent's active Pokemon is a metal Pokemon, this attack does 30 more damage. So 1 colorless energy does 50 to metal Pokemon. Makes a lot of sense. If metal Pokemon ever become like huge in the game, like tier 1 metal type Pokemon decks, maybe Mawile is an interesting thing to include in some decks, but for now, not really. We have a Probopass EX, which is interesting because it's a stage 1 with a lot of HP, 160 HP. Has the defensive unit attack for metal colorless. It does 90 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 20 less damage from attacks. So you can kind of make like a tanky sort of deck with Probopass, playing maybe some water energies, Irida, potions, and the Adaman, which lets you take 20 less damage from attacks as well. I don't think this is super good, but it is interesting, and I think there will be certainly some videos made about Probopass EX. We have a new Bronzong, has the Psychic attack for 3 colorless energy. That's really interesting because it's splashable into any deck. This attack does 20 more damage for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. We've seen this sort of attack before printed on other cards. I don't think this is going to see any play, but it is interesting that they gave it just like all colorless energy as the attack cost so that it is splashable into any deck. Then we have an Origin Form Dialga. 120 HP, has the Time Smash attack for 2 metal and a colorless, does 100 damage, and flip a coin of tails during your next turn. This Pokemon can't attack. That's an okay attacker, but I don't think that's going to see really any play. Then we have a new Giratina. I was really hoping for a Giratina EX in this set. We didn't quite get one. We did get a new Giratina, but sadly this thing stinks. Has the Crisis Dive attack for Grass, Psychic Colorless, does 120 damage. And then you have to discard 2 of the energy from this Pokemon. So this card is just awful. We have a new Eevee. Nothing really special there. This Snorlax obviously gets paired with Berry, has the Collapse attack for 4 colorless energy, does 100 damage, and this Pokemon is now asleep. Obviously, Berry can let you use that attack for 2 colorless energy, and it's just like a big tanky wall to have in your active to set something else up behind. So I think this card is kind of interesting. It's nothing crazy, but you definitely can like set up behind this Snorlax wall. We have a new Noctowl with the Silent Wing attack for 2 colorless energy, does 50, and your opponent reveals their hand. I don't think this is very good, but Noctowl's cool. And then we have the Staraptor line. Again, Barry works with the Staraptor, so your Staraptor can attack for 1 colorless energy instead of 3 colorless energy. And it's got the Brave Bird attack. It does 130 damage, and then this Pokemon also does 20 damage to itself. I think that's actually pretty interesting. This is probably the best attacker that Barry has, but it is on a stage 2, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. But Brave Bird doing 130 for 1 energy, potentially, I think that could be pretty strong. Now we have a new Shaman. This is also a very, very interesting card from this set. The Shaman has 70 HP. It's a basic, has the Sky Support ability. As long as this Pokemon is on your bench, your active basic Pokemon's retreat cost is 1 less. So this is like a permanent X speed in play for you for your basic Pokemon only. And it has the flap attack for 2 colors for 30. But really, you're playing this for the ability. I think that's really cool. I think this also does stack. So your basic Pokemon in play would have 2 less retreat costs if you had 2 Shamans in play. I don't think there's a ton of decks that are going to be like happy to fill up their bench with Shamans, but it is really an interesting card to have in the card pool. And we get to our Arceus. Arceus non-EX, the basic non-rule box Arceus, has the Power Blast attack for 4 colorless energy, does 100 damage, and you discard a random energy from this Pokemon. I think this card stinks, but I think it's it will see play if people are trying to play like the Link ability Pokemon without having any rule box Pokemon in play. So it's never something you're going to be attacking with. You're going to be using the other Link Pokemon, but you want access to their abilities without having a 2-prizer in play. That's the only reason you would ever really play this Arceus over the Arceus EX, which is very, very strong. 140 HP basic, has the fabled luster ability. This Pokemon can't be affected by any special conditions, which is actually a very good ability to have in a world of wheezings and sleep and whatever. It's just really nice to not be able to be affected by special conditions. Then it has the ultimate force attack for 3 colorless energy, the 70 plus 20 more damage for each of your benched Pokemon. So if you have a full bench, you're doing 130 damage, which is really good. And obviously you can boost the damage output of this attack with things like the Crobat. So Arceus EX is like, obviously, it's the mascot of the set, so it's probably going to be the best card that we got in the set, and it certainly looks to be that. I think there's going to be a ton of decks made with Arceus EX of many different types. Obviously, it's a colorless Pokemon. You can play it in a dark deck, a water deck, a grass deck, a fire deck, whatever. This card is very good. And we have our art rares and all that sort of stuff, which are fun to just kind of take a look at. This Meryl is a fun art for sure. The Glaceon is awesome. His Garchomp EX is actually super cool with it. Like, is it fighting Arceus? I don't know, but that's really sick. I think this Probopass art is pretty funny. It's like him just sitting out there, and then like the 3 parts of him are like sitting over the side, and he's like side-eyeing them. That's kind of funny. And then we have the immersive art Arceus EX, which is also really quite cool. And then we have our full art supporters, which I think the full art supporters look great in the game. They seem like some of the hardest cards to pull in the game. I have very few full art supporters. They're really tough to get, but they are very cool. So that is our newest set in Pokemon TCG Pocket. I think that this set is going to shake things up just enough to keep things interesting, but definitely not going to be shaking things up as much as like our full like A3 set that we should, I assume, get in March or April, probably more towards April. But we will obviously be continuing to get more sets. A lot of people have been talking about how they're concerned about how fast sets are coming out in TCG Pocket. Personally, I understand that as a free-to-play player, that is definitely tough. I'm not free to play because I'm trying to get all these cards to make these decks and make these videos for y'all. So I understand definitely as a free-to-play player that it is tough with the amount of sets coming out as fast as they are. But I actually think it's really important for the game to grow and for the competitive environment to have access to new cards pretty regularly. So I'm really happy with the pace that these sets are coming out at. What I'm hoping for is more cool events in the game. We have like the ranked, we have like the emblem events that happen, but those are getting kind of stale. Like it's the same thing every set release. So I would like to see some like cooler events coming into the game. It sounds like we are getting a ranked mode in March as well, so that's really cool. And obviously we have all the massive online tournaments, which are great. And we're all keeping our fingers crossed to hope that Pokemon TCG Pocket could get to a point where it could be in the world circuit. I think we got some bad news on that this week. There was potentially an interview with the head of like the competitive circuit where he said they have no plans for Pocket right now, and that it needs some balancing before they would ever consider that. But I think we could get there, in the next year or so. So, really exciting time for TCG Pocket. Absolutely loving the game still. Hope you guys are as well. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you've been enjoying our content here. And we'll see you guys in the next video.